And we gave him a minute, so let's go ahead and start. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Animas Museum Second Saturday Seminar Series for March. My name's Susan Jones. I'm on the board of directors here at the La Plata County Historical Society, and I'll be your host today. We're so glad to have you here with us today, as we also kick off a partnership with the wonderful restaurant El Moro Spirits and Tavern. So all of you who are live today, will, so to speak, will receive a $10 gift certificate redeemable at any time at any one of their brunches or lunches or dinners at their location at 945 Main Avenue. And the delightful and multi-talented bartender there, Margaret Asensi, has shared with us a video about the history, a little bit about the history of cocktails and how to make a Tom Collins Graden. So you can sip along while you're listening to Tom Graden's story. You know, several weeks ago, the Durango Herald reported that Burt Reynolds, the actor, was being buried, or at least his cremains were being buried at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles, right near actor Tyrone Powers. And as it happens, our own Tom Graden is also buried right next to Tyrone Powers, or right in there. We posted a picture of Tom's grave on our Facebook page, and that post received over 2,200 views, which is pretty good for us. It also generated a couple of comments like, oh, I remember Graden's store, or I remember Graden's mill, and who was that Tom Graden guy, and why did he end up in California? So that's why we're here today, to answer some of those questions. After a quick video, I'm going to introduce Charles D. Ferdinando. You know, Charlie has been Tom Graden since 2014 as part of the Durango and Silverton Narrow Gauge Railroad's onboard narration program. In fact, if you Google Tom Graden, you will see Charlie's picture. Right up there. Charlie is a fifth generation Durango native, a Durango High School graduate, Fort Lewis College graduate, and he was in at the beginning when Durango started thinking about preserving its wonderful history and starting a museum. That's the Animas Museum today. Charlie rebuilt the Joy Cabin, which is on the museum grounds, a 1876 era log cabin, which you can visit virtually on our website. And Charlie currently serves on the board of directors here at La Plata County Historical Society. He's an incredible resource for local history, and he's going to be telling Tom Graden's story today. Before we get started, I want to do the usual little Zoom housekeeping for those of you who are new to us. We're using Zoom's webinar feature, which means that you are all muted and your videos are all off. At the bottom of the screen, you may need to mouse down a little to see it. There are a couple of icons. We have turned off the chat today to minimize any distractions, but there is a little Q&A icon. And if you have any issues or something's not working or you have any questions, go ahead and put it in, type it into the Q&A, and we will monitor that. We're going to save up the questions for Tom for the end of his talk. So we'll get those questions that are typed into the Q&A to him. And at that time, we'll open it up so you can click that little hand icon and raise your hand. And if we see your hand raised, we'll unmute you or let you unmute yourself. And you can ask your question to Tom right then and there if you don't feel like typing it in. So either way you want to go. We'll get your questions answered. This session is being recorded, and you will receive an email in 24 hours with a link to the recording and a separate email from El Moro with your gift certificate. I also want to assure you that those of us here in the museum are socially distant and we're masked. Oh, I still have mine on when we're not on camera, following the health department protocols while the museum is closed. So let's get started. First off, I want to share this this video of Margaret Asensi from El Moro and a little bit of cocktail history.
Today we're going to be talking about Tom C. Graden, who witnessed and aided in the rise of Durango in the late 1800s. This time period was also the rise of the cocktail, and we thought it might be fun to drink the way that Tom Graden might have. Drinks at the time were generally called punches and toddies, and they were just trying to make the time period's fiery hooch easier to drink. The term cocktail appeared to categorize medicinal hangover cures composed of spirits of any kind, sugar, water, and bitters to chase away the effects from the previous night's indulgences. Then in the 1850s, the world of drinking changed dramatically with the introduction of ice and the ability to keep things cold and thus more refreshing. Expansion into the Wild West begins as mines open up, exposing people to adventure and the land's wealth. Towns start popping up in these areas, like Durango, to aid in the flow of these riches and those seeking them. The American mixologists learned to travel the trade routes and mine the miners, learning new tricks everywhere they went. Some even started publishing books on cocktails and concoctions they made, thus setting the standard as to how to make them. Some books mention the Collins, originally named after John Collins, the head waiter at Limmer's in London, and was described as a gin punch stretched with iced soda water. When it migrated to America, some started using American whiskey, and it retained its name. In the 1870s, some started calling them Tom Collins as the rise of Old Tom Gin occurred, and saloons surged with a joke about a man named Tom who went around saying terrible things about people. Perhaps a mixologist who stopped through the area made this beverage for Mr. Tom Collins, Graden. Now, this concoction, like most from behind the bar, has a simple recipe and can be modified to suit your tastes. All you need is the spirit of your choice, juice, sugar, or simple syrup. To make simple syrup, take 1 to 2 cups of sugar and add 1 cup of hot water. Combine and shake until the sugar dissolves. Many recipes will follow the guidelines of equal parts juice and sugar that combined equal the amount of your spirit. Generally, this is 1.5 ounces of your spirit, 3/4 of an ounce of your juice, and 3/4 ounce of your simple syrup. That's what we're going to do today. We're going to take 3/4 ounce of lemon juice, 3/4 ounce of simple syrup, and 1.5 ounces of our spirit. Shake with some ice and strain into a glass. Top off with some soda water, which mixes it a little bit more, ice, and a garnish because everyone deserves a fancy garnish. Or build it in a cup and give it a good stir. You can also modify this drink to your tastes. For example, if you add an extra 1/4 ounce of lemon to make it more acidified, use a little bit less sugar to fit a spring diet, or remove the spirits altogether for refreshing sparkling lemonade. This weekend, we will have a special drink available at El Moro Spirits and Tavern to honor Tom Graden's impact on our wonderful town. We will also have plenty of other cocktails, non-alcoholic mocktails, and fun concoctions created by our own modern-day mixologists to suit every mood or fancy. So sit back with that homemade beverage and enjoy learning about Tom C. Graden.
All right.
Today we're going to be talking about Tom C. Graden, who
And there we go, Tom.
Good day, everyone. Thanks for being with us. Again, we're going to be talking about Thomas Cyrus Graden. He was born in 1843 in Jefferson County, Ohio. He was the second child of Thomas C. Graden Sr. and Christina Ann Speedy. His father had been married before and had 6 children by his first wife. She passed away and he remarried Christina and had 3 more sons, Thomas being the second. He was born in 1843. Unfortunately, his father died of smallpox in 1850, leaving his mother with 3 young boys. He had the 6 older siblings, but unfortunately, because of the times, they fell in line to inherit ahead of Christina and the 3 younger children. So they sort of got the short end of the stick. So poverty was part of their life. They were living in Jefferson County until his father's death, and then by 1860, they're moved to Harrison County, Ohio. In 1862, Thomas joins the Union Army, and he becomes part of the 52nd Regiment of the Ohio Volunteer Infantry. And he's mustered in at Camp Dennison, Ohio on August the 22nd of 1862. He was paid a $25 bounty for joining the Army, and he had to sign up for 3 years service. Because of his family's poverty, I think he probably joined so he could give that $25 to his mother and alleviate some of their poverty. So he goes into the service August the 22nd, 1862, at the age of 20. He serves his 3 years in the Union Army. The 52nd Regiment from Ohio becomes part of Sherman's Army, and of course the famous Sherman's March to the Sea. Graden was in a lot of major battles in the Civil War, including the Battle of Missionary Ridge. And that's maybe why we have a local Missionary Ridge here in the Animas Valley. In 1865, Graden is mustered out of the Army at Washington, D.C. He returns back to Ohio to his mother and his two full brothers. But by 1866, Thomas, along with his brother Samuel and his mother, relocate to Platte County, Missouri. And he is listed on the 1870 census in Platte County, Missouri, as a farmer. By 1874, we don't know exactly when, Thomas Graden starts making his way west. He gets an adventurous spirit and comes west to Colorado. He ends up in Del Norte, Colorado. He hears about the mineral discoveries being made in the San Juan Mountains. And at that time, the entry point for the San Juan Mountains in the upper Animas reaches, the jumping off point was Del Norte, Colorado. That was the last supply point. So he makes his way north from Del Norte, up the Rio Grande River. He comes to either Cunningham Pass or Stony Pass. In those early days, sometimes the two passes were confused, and some references are made to either Cunningham or Stony Pass, and they don't differentiate between the two. But that was the entry point for the upper Animas across the Continental Divide. So Thomas makes his way down over the pass to the Animas River drainage and comes to the community of Eureka. The picture that you're looking at is an early artist rendition of what the Animas Valley at Eureka would have looked like. And so we don't know exactly when. Dates are not really good at this time period, but sometime between 1874 and 1875, Thomas Graden is in the upper Animas Valley. He probably did a little prospecting at first, but finds that that's a hard way to make a living, and he goes into contracting, and he gets a few jobs with with the La Plata County commissioners. At that time, even Silverton and the upper reaches of the Animas were still part of La Plata County. San Juan County was not created until 1881. So anyway, he starts a contracting business one of the first jobs he did was to build a bridge across the Animas River near the community of the mining camp of Eureka. He then goes on to build a bridge across Cement Creek in the area that becomes Silverton, the town of Silverton. He also builds the road up Cement Creek between Silverton and Gladstone. And he becomes involved with James L. Whiteman, who was building a toll road down the Animas River from Silverton to Hermosa and the lower Animas Valley. Eventually, Thomas Graden becomes a trustee of the Animas Canyon Toll Road under Mr. Whiteman. And he also is reputed to have done a lot of freighting on that toll road using ox teams. And as mineral development continues to grow in the upper San Juans and upper Animas Valley, everyone realizes there's a need to get the railroad there, because the big drawback is freighting into this isolated area of Colorado. There weren't good roads. It was very expensive to get goods into the area and get mineral production out of the area. So the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, which began in 1871, was working up around Denver and Colorado Springs, and they were expanding into the mountains. But there were overtures about extending across the Continental Divide into this area, but that was an expensive proposition, and there was more money to be made on the eastern slope. So to try to prompt General Palmer and the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad to build into this area, numerous business men began incorporating railroads to try to goad the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad into building into this area. One of these railroad companies that was incorporated involved Thomas Graden as a trustee, along with Mr. James L. Whiteman and a bunch of other leading businessmen. These businessmen were from Silverton and Del Norte. They incorporated the Bakers Park and Lower Animas River Railroad Company. I don't think any of them ever really expected to ever drive a spike into the ground, but it was a way to get the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad's railways attention, because they didn't like competition. Next slide, please. Okay, the next image that you're looking at is a hand-drawn map done by Andy Chitwood back in about 1880 of the new town of Animas City down in the lower valley. It comes about around 1876 when Colorado achieves statehood. And Thomas Graden, by this time, has built down into this part of the valley. He's still a trustee for the Waitman toll road in the upper Animas, but he builds a new road going east from the new town of Animas City all the way over to Pagosa Springs. And he starts freighting over that road. So he builds a home in Animas City, and on this map, his home was on Main Street, north of 2nd Street and directly across from the Animas City schoolhouse. He also becomes involved in politics. He was a staunch Republican, the party of Lincoln, and he's involved in the county Republican Party. And in the early days of Animas City, he gets elected to the town council as an alderman. And at the same time that he moves down to the lower valley here, he builds a sawmill. And that was his original desire when he came into this area, was to become involved in the timber industry. So he probably had experience back in Missouri before he ever came west. But there were already existing sawmills up in the Bakers Park and Silverton area, and he did not want to have to attempt to bring that heavy sawmill equipment across Stony Pass or Cunningham Pass into the Animas Valley. But again, by the 1876, there's a big demand for lumber with the new town of Animas City, and he files on timber rights and builds a sawmill down in the area of the lower Animas. And he goes into the lumber business. But he also begins filing on coal claims. He files on timber claims and coal claims because he knows coal is going to be important to the early development of industry in the area. And next slide, please. This picture illustrates a typical sawmill of the period. This particular picture is of the Azotea sawmill, which was owned by the Sullenberger family over around Pagosa at a little later date. But Graden has an interesting connection with the Sullenbergers. He has business dealings with them, and by 1879, the Denver and Rio Grande Railway Company under General William Jackson Palmer announces that they're finally going to build the San Juan extension across the Continental Divide into western Colorado and the San Juans to try to reach the rich mineral deposits in the upper San Juans. At that time, one of the biggest issues for the railroad was getting enough material. And so we bring in some new folks into the equation here. Graden realizes that with the coming of the railroad, they're going to need lots of ties, timber, and lumber. And so he somehow puts a bid in with General Palmer to supply timber for the San Juan extension to get the railroad from Alamosa across Cumbres Pass and to Durango, and then eventually the Silverton extension from Durango on to Silverton. Next slide, please. Here we have a portrait of Thomas Graden and Robert E. Sloan. Robert E. Sloan was a Civil War veteran himself. He had served under General William Jackson Palmer in Palmer's Pennsylvania Cavalry Unit. He was the ordnance officer for Palmer during the war. And when Palmer became involved in building the Kansas Pacific Railroad into Denver before 1871, Palmer enlisted the help of Robert E. Sloan, who had settled back in Pennsylvania after the Civil War. Robert E. Sloan comes west, and he is tapped to oversee the production of ties and timber for the Kansas Pacific Railroad into Denver. After that is completed, Sloan goes back to Pennsylvania and then eventually establishes a lumber and construction type business in Denver. When Palmer decides in 1879 to build the San Juan extension, he enlists Robert Sloan's help again. And at that point, Robert E. Sloan and Thomas Graden become partners in the sawmill and timber business to provide the ties for the San Juan extension and other miscellaneous timber and lumber. Again, Sloan served under Palmer in the 15th Pennsylvania Cavalry, and again was an ordnance officer. Next slide, please. This shows the railroad survey crew, and so this is the period 1879, 1880. In the 1880 census, Thomas Graden is listed as being over at Conejos, Colorado, in the tie camp. They did, the enumerators for the census went to the tie camp, and they list everyone who was working in that tie camp producing material for the railroad. So what Sloan and Graden did was that they produced ties and lumber, and they would stockpile them along the surveyed route for the Denver and Rio Grande San Juan extension, and they would stockpile this material ahead of the construction crews. And again, they started over at Conejos and worked their way over Cumbres Pass to Chama, and then continued working from Chama forward to the Animas Valley, and eventually to what would become the new town site of Durango. Next slide, please. The railroad was going to come into the Animas Valley. The Denver and Rio Grande Railroad decides to start their own town company and name it Durango. The new site for Durango is approximately 2 miles south of the existing community of Animas City. And this is an early view of the new town of Durango, probably in early 1880. This is before the railroad's arrival. And the photograph was taken at what is now 9th Street, just east of Main Avenue. And it's looking directly west down what is now 9th Street. On the north side, there is the First National Bank, the original First National Bank building. And the buildings that you see to the south of 9th, beyond that large pine tree, you'll see a 2-story building, which is the European Hotel and numerous other structures. Those structures were all built on railroad land, and they were squatting over there. That was not within the platted area of the new town of Durango. The First National Bank building and other buildings that we see on Main Street there were within the boundaries of platted Durango, but a huge community built up in the unincorporated area beyond where the railroad right-of-way would be. And that two-story European hotel happened to be built on the railroad right-of-way. And eventually it had to be moved off the railroad right-of-way so that they could lay tracks. In the first, the town of Durango was laid out in September of 1880, and it grew exponentially in that first few months of existence. And during this early day period of Durango, it was what was considered the lawless period. There was they had not had a municipal election, and so a lawless faction moved into the new town. Again, Durango was going to be the end of the tracks for a while for the railroad. And as the railroad built, all of these new towns that sprang up seemed to be taken over for short periods of time by this lawless faction who tried to take advantage of the citizens before there was a town government to oversee law enforcement, etc. And in this early period, Durango goes through what is known as the Stockton Gang troubles. And the Stockton Gang, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but the Stocktons were notorious outlaws that had come from Texas through New Mexico. They had prices on their head in New Mexico. Then they made their way into Colorado. One of the Stockton brothers ends up being town marshal in the town of Animas City for a while. The Stockton Gang during this period is rustling cattle in New Mexico, bringing them up to the mining camps in Colorado and selling them for beef and so forth. Well, the gang is notorious. And this brings us to April 1880. And there was a gentleman by the name of Moorman, Henry R. Moorman. He is sort of a hangers-on with the Stockton Gang. He had come west. He had worked as a stagecoach driver for a while. He was young. He liked to drink. When he drank, he turned mean. And this brings us to April the 9th of 1880. And another member of the Stockton Gang, Dyson Eskridge, and Mr. Moorman decide they're going to go partying at one of the saloons in the new town of Durango. They decide they're going to take in a variety show at the Coliseum Theater. Now, the Coliseum Theater was really a front for prostitution, and Henry Moorman and Dyson Eskridge attend a performance at the Coliseum Theater in the company of Big Emma and Alice Harrison, both prostitutes. When the show's over, they drink a lot during the show. After the show, they decide to continue their revelry, and they go to the Eclipse Saloon and drink some more. It's on the eve of April the 10th. And so Around midnight, they decide to head back to the Coliseum Theater. By this time, Henry Mormon is in a foul mood. They start a scuffle outside the Coliseum saloon. The local constabulary shows up, breaks up the fight, but Mormon's not satisfied, and after midnight, he decides to go into the Coliseum Theater, guns blazing, and he just starts shooting up the place. And one of his bullets hits Perry Steffi in the arm. It's not a fatal wound, but after hitting his arm, the bullet ricochets and hits an innocent bystander by the name of James Knox Polk Prindle, and hits Prindle in the hip. Prindle is bleeding profusely. He falls to the floor and yells out to Mormon, "Partner, you hit the wrong guy." And within about 20 minutes, Prindle is dead. He bleeds to death. Mormon and Eskridge flee the scene, and Deputy Marshal Dwyer is notified. He goes to the Justice of the Peace to swear out warrants. In the meanwhile, the town constable starts tracking Mormon, and luckily there was fresh snow on the ground. And it only takes him about 20 minutes, and he finds Mormon and Tom. The constable was named Tom Payton, and he tracks Mormon to a lumber pile where he's hiding, and he takes Mormon into custody very quickly. So Mormon gets taken to Durango's jail and put into jail. Constable Payton assures Mormon that he'll watch out for his safety. Well, that's a big task for a town that is very irritated by this shooting and killing. The next day, the town is very agitated. Mormon is in jail, and about 20 minutes before midnight on the 10th, two shots ring out, which is a signal for the Public Safety Committee to convene at the town jail. So about 300 citizens of Durango, these would have been men most likely, start converging on the jail and surround the jail. They overtake the guards, and they take Mr. Mormon and they march him to the big pine tree that's visible in this picture. It was down near the railroad right-of-way. It was across from what the location of the town post office, and they proceed to hang Mr. Mormon. So he is strung up, he is lynched at that pine tree, and a notice is put up to prevent anyone from taking his body down. This is all done under the cover of darkness, and when dawn occurs the next morning, Mormon is still dangling from that pine tree. And of course, great crowds come out, and his body is left there for a certain amount of time. So again, about 300 citizens that called themselves the Committee for Public Safety um, lynch Mr. Moorman. This was all before the first municipal elections in Durango, and it wasn't long after this event occurred that Durango had its first municipal election. At the same time, there was vigilantes from Farmington who had made their way up to the Animas Valley in an attempt to come after the Stockton gang. And they get in the middle of all this hubbub that's happening with Henry Moorman, and this leads to what we call the shootout between Durango and the Farmington Cowboys, and that's a whole nother story that we will have to go into at another time. But there's good information about that if you want to read about it. Next slide, please. So here's an early day railroad picture. This is one of the class of locomotives that were used during the construction of the San Juan extension. The railroad finally arrives in the new town of Durango on July the 27th of 1881. The first work train arrived in Durango on July the 27th, 1881. By 1881, Thomas Graden, he's still working with Robert Sloan under the Graden Lumber Company logo, so, you know, creating supplies and timber for the railroad. But he's also getting involved in a lot of other new industries and business ventures in the new town of Durango. Thomas Graden and Robert Sloan move one of their sawmills to a location about 2 miles south of Silverton, so that they can start producing ties and timber for the Silverton extension. But once the railroad arrived in Durango in late summer of 1881, they really suspended construction going north because they needed their construction crews to finish their Gunnison extension that summer. So construction crews are pulled from the Animas Valley, sent up to Gunnison, and construction is sort of slowed down. But that gives Sloan and Graden a chance to get supplies placed and built up for the Silverton extension. Thomas Graden buys 160 acres up near Pinkerton Springs from William McPhee, who had married the Pinkerton, one of the Pinkerton girls. And again, he buys that 160 acres for mostly for the timber. And at some point he will locate a sawmill on that property. So they have a sawmill in the north end of the Animas Canyon up near Silverton, and then they have another sawmill down in the lower valley here. Again, both were producing ties and timber for the Silverton extension. By this time, Graden had 4 sawmills operating in La Plata County. If you count the mill up near Silverton, that would be 5 mills, because that was in San Juan County. His 4 mills operating in La Plata County, one was on the Pine River, one was over on Lightner Creek, one was on the McPhee homestead, and there was another one also. Next slide, please. This is a view of early Durango taken from the west side of the Animas River, and down at the in the lower edge along the river, you see another one of Thomas Graden's sawmills. This is located on property about where the Albertsons grocery store is today, and so forth. Let's move on to the next slide. This is another view taken from the west, looking on the new town of Durango. And this is a little later. This is at least 1883. And down near the river there, you see a large building north of the bridge. And that is the Giles and Graden flour mill. This is one of Graden's new ventures in the new town of Durango. He most likely built the mill for Giles, and one of Graden's business practices was he would build these structures for another businessman, and instead of taking payment for construction, he would take a percentage of the business, a partnership in the business. Let's go to the next slide. We're sort of running out of time here. Sorry, I'm long-winded. This is a close-up view of the Giles and Graden flour mill. Again, it was in that area around where Albertson's grocery store is today. Let's take the next slide. This is an extension of the mill. And again, Graden eventually ends up owning the Giles mill, and he builds this new mill next door. And this is for both producing, the flour was produced in the old mill. This new mill was for animal feeds and storage facilities, so forth. Let's go to the next slide. In 1890, Thomas Graden and Robert Sloan, they develop a mercantile business. Well, actually in 1880, but by 1890, they go into groceries along with other mercantile goods. So these three views show the beginnings of Graden Mercantile back in 1880. There's an 1895 picture there when they go into after they go into the grocery business. The Graden's Mercantile becomes a full-line department store, and becomes a huge store. And the business continued clear up. Well, the Graden Mercantile still exists today, but the department store in 1971, when you see this other picture, was still a going department store in downtown Durango. Let's go to the next slide. Here's an early view of Graden Mercantile. This is in the 700 block of Main Avenue, the west side. The big smokestacks that you see over to the one side are from the first electric generating plant in Durango, which Graden was also involved in starting. Let's go to the next slide. Here's another view of the main Graden Mercantile building at the corner of 8th and Main. This building was destroyed by fire and in the 1940s, and was replaced by a more modern building. Let's go to the next slide. Here's a view looking down 8th Street from 2nd Avenue. You see the Newman building, and you see the electric streetcar in the middle of Main Street. The Durango Railway and Realty Company was another business venture that Thomas Graden was involved in. Again, he helped form the first electric company in Durango, incorporating it in 1885. By 1887, Durango was basically electrified. 1892, they move into the electric streetcar business, and so forth. So let's move on to the next slide. This is the second electric generating plant built in Durango. This is where the Discovery Museum is located today. They needed larger generating capacity to keep the street railway going, and also the growing population of Durango with the growing demand for electricity. And so, again, we're running out of time, so I'm just going to sort of speed this up a little bit. We could go on and on, but the point is, Graden was involved in cutting edge technology, and he was involved, he had his finger in every pie in Durango, it seems like, at one time or another. By 1914, he decides to sort of retire a little bit from Graden Mercantile, and he releases himself from active management. He sort of turns that over to Robert Sloan and the Sloan family. And he decides to start wintering in California. He's not really retiring in the sense that he's giving up his businesses. He's just looking at new business opportunities. So by 1914, he's starting to winter around Pasadena and Los Angeles. And it's while he's there that he becomes interested in a new business venture. And that is the timber industry in the Philippines. In 1915, he's actually in Manila in the Philippines. And we'll go to the next slide here. This shows a logging train in the Philippines. And you can see the size of the mahogany logs that they were dealing with. So this becomes another business venture for Thomas Graden. In 1906, he had always been involved in politics. He served several times as mayor of Durango. He was alderman in Durango. He had been alderman in the town of Animas City. He was elected to the state legislature in 1906. So he was doing lots and lots of different things. So let's go to the final slide. Okay. This is Thomas Graden's gravestone, grave marker at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in California. In 1923, after coming back to this area from his winter vacation in California, Graden was feeling ill. He went to a doctor. The doctor decided that he really should go to Denver to see a specialist. He goes up to Denver. The doctors there diagnose that he's in the late stages of stomach cancer. And they suggest to him that for what little time he has left, he probably should go to a lower elevation. Um, and so while Graden's in Denver, he drafts his last will and testament, and then he makes his way back to California, and he dies in California in 1924. He was very specific to his family. He had a niece and nephew who were working with him in Durango. That when the time came when he died, he wanted no fuss to be made. He wanted to be buried wherever he died. And so when he died in 1924, he was buried at the cemetery, closest cemetery, which was the Hollywood Cemetery in California. And this is how you would see his stone today. So again, at the bottom there, it mentions that he was a member of the 52nd Regiment of the Ohio Volunteer Infantry. So we're about to our end, but if anybody's got questions, Susan's been monitoring the comments, and so if I'm happy to answer questions.
Actually, everybody's been really quiet. I have no questions. If anybody wants to raise your hand and ask Charlie a question, go for it.
Again, we covered this pretty quickly, and there's a lot to cover in a short time. And so I'm just giving you the highlights of his life. And at some point, if you're interested, there's a lot of material out there. We have uncovered stuff through his family. There's a family member that has done genealogy research. That was sort of the beginning. Alan Nosseman's books. There's 3 volumes of Many More Mountains, and there's information about Thomas Graden in both volume 2 and volume 3. And there's also more information about the Stockton gang and everything that was happening then I'm sorry, Susan, would you mention that book? I don't have it in front of me.
It's Ike and Porter Stockton by Michael Maddox.
Okay.
And we'll list the sources on the website where you'll find the video when you get your email about that tomorrow.
Any questions?
And if you do think of something, send us an email at info@animismuseum.org, and we'll get them answered. And or if you have any comments, again, info@animismuseum.org. We'd love to hear from you.
And just, I mean, to me, Thomas Graden is a fascinating character. Again, he was a Civil War veteran, so he was involved with the GAR, Grand Army of the Republic. That was a veterans group of the Civil War. He left money in his will for a monument up at Greenmount Cemetery to remember those veterans. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore, but it's in that section. There's a new monument there that replaced the one that he paid for and so forth. So anything else, Susan?
I think that looks like it.
Do we have a few more minutes, or is
Yep.
that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I was just going to say, in his last will and testament, Graden died a very wealthy man, and the bulk of his estate went to charitable causes. He did leave money to descendants of his half brothers and sisters and his own brother's family, but the bulk of his estate went to charitable causes. Here in Durango, he left money to the Sisters of Mercy and Mercy Hospital. He left money to the First Presbyterian Church. He left money for a fund for poor women and children but there was a proviso that the county would have to match his $10,000 donation. They didn't do it, and so that fund reverted back to his estate and was split up amongst other divisees of his estate. So I think I'll end it there.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Charlie. If there are no other questions, we'll close it up here today. Thanks again to Charlie and the folks at El Moro. And thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Next month, please join us again on May 8th at 1 p.m. when Durango Police Department historian Sharon Grieve will be sharing and celebrating the police department's 140th anniversary this year. We'll have more details coming out on our website and in an e-blast, and be sure to follow us on Facebook or Instagram, and we'll have all the details coming up. If you have any other questions, comments, we're at info@animusmuseum.org. So enjoy your Tom Collins Gradens. Thanks again and cheers. See you next month.